The morning of May 6, 2023, arrived with a mixture of excitement and nervous energy across London. Westminster Abbey stood tall and proud, ready to witness history as King Charles III would be crowned in a ceremony that millions around the world had been waiting for. Among the thousands preparing for this momentous day, one family held a particularly special place in the hearts of the public. William, Kate, and their 3 children were not just attending the coronation as guests. They were there as the future of the monarchy itself. Kate woke early that morning, her mind racing through the details of the day ahead. She had spent weeks planning every aspect of her children's involvement in the ceremony. George, at 9 years old, would serve as one of the pages of honor, a role that carried both privilege and pressure. Charlotte, now 8, and Louis, just 5, would attend as well, and Kate knew that keeping them calm and composed throughout the lengthy ceremony would be a challenge. She thought about Louis especially, remembering his cheeky antics during the Platinum Jubilee celebrations the year before, when his animated facial expressions had stolen the show and become internet sensations overnight. William had his own concerns. As the heir to the throne, he understood the weight of this day better than most. His father was finally receiving the crown after decades of waiting, and William wanted everything to be perfect. He also knew that the eyes of the world would be on his family, judging, analyzing, and capturing every moment. The relationship between father and son had weathered storms over the years, particularly after the difficulties with Harry and the ongoing tensions within the family. Today needed to be a day of unity, a day that showed the monarchy moving forward with strength and grace. The family gathered at Kensington Palace for final preparations. George stood in his crimson and gold uniform, looking both proud and slightly overwhelmed. Kate knelt down to his level, adjusting his collar and speaking to him in soft, reassuring tones. She reminded him of the practice sessions they had done, the walks through the Abbey rehearsing his movements. George nodded seriously, determined to make his parents and grandfather proud. Charlotte watched her brother with wide eyes, smoothing down her own dress, a beautiful white creation with silver embroidery that caught the light. She had always been mature beyond her years, and Kate could see her daughter taking mental notes, preparing herself for the public attention. Louis bounced around the room with typical 5-year-old energy. Kate and William exchanged knowing glances, both wondering how their youngest would handle sitting still for hours in the Abbey. William scooped Louis up, tickling him gently before setting him down with a gentle reminder to be on his best behavior. Louis grinned up at his father, promising to be good, though his eyes still sparkled with mischief. The journey to Westminster Abbey was carefully orchestrated. The family traveled in a state car, waving to the crowds that lined the streets. Thousands of people had camped out overnight, some for days just to catch a glimpse of the royal family. Many held signs and flags cheering as the vehicles passed. Kate noticed Charlotte's face pressed against the window, taking in the scene with wonder. Even for children who had grown up in the public eye, this was something extraordinary. Inside the Abbey, the atmosphere was electric. Heads of state, celebrities, and dignitaries from around the world filled the pews. The ancient building buzzed with whispered conversations and the rustle of formal attire. Kate guided her children to their seats, positioned where they would have a clear view of the ceremony but also be visible to the cameras. She had chosen their seating carefully, ensuring that Louis sat between her and Charlotte, hoping that his sister's calm presence might help keep him settled. As the ceremony began, the cameras caught every detail. George took his position with the other pages of honor, standing straight and serious. Kate watched him with a mixture of pride and protective concern. Her son was handling the pressure beautifully, but she knew how nervous he must be feeling. William sat beside her, his face composed and regal, though she could feel the tension in his posture. This was his father's day, but it was also a preview of his own future, a future that George would one day inherit. The music swelled, filling the Abbey with its majestic sound. Charlotte sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on the ceremony unfolding before her. Louis started well, watching with genuine interest as his grandfather processed down the aisle in his ceremonial robes. But as the minutes stretched into an hour, Kate could see him beginning to fidget. She placed a gentle hand on his knee, a silent reminder to stay calm. The moment when Charles was crowned was breathtaking. The weight of history hung in the air as the Archbishop of Canterbury lifted the crown. In that instant, William and Kate's children were witnessing their grandfather become king, a moment that would define their lives and their futures. George, standing in his position of honor, watched with solemn eyes. Charlotte barely breathed, absorbing every detail, and Louis, for just that moment, sat perfectly still, sensing the importance of what was happening even if he didn't fully understand it yet. Kate felt tears prick her eyes as she watched her father-in-law crowned. Despite all the challenges, the controversies, and the difficult moments the family had faced, this was a triumph. William reached over and squeezed her hand, a brief moment of connection between them in the midst of the grand ceremony. They were supporting his father, yes, but they were also preparing for their own journey ahead, one that their children would share with them every step of the way. The coronation ceremony continued with its ancient rituals and protocols, each movement choreographed and practiced for months. Kate kept a watchful eye on all three children, particularly Louis, who was showing remarkable restraint for a child his age. She noticed the way he would occasionally lean toward Charlotte, whispering questions that his sister would answer with patient, hushed responses. Charlotte had become something of a little guardian, understanding her role as the middle child, who could bridge the gap between her older brother's responsibilities and her younger brother's playful nature. George remained at his post, performing his duties as a page of honor with impressive composure. When it came time for him to assist with the ceremonial robes, he moved with careful precision, his small hands steady as he helped carry the heavy fabric. Kate's heart swelled watching him. Her eldest child was growing up before her eyes, stepping into a role that would only become more demanding as he aged. She caught William's eye and saw her own emotions reflected there. Pride, certainly, but also a touch of sadness at how quickly their children were maturing under the constant glare of public scrutiny. The ceremony included moments of such grandeur that even the most restless child would be captivated. When the choir sang, their voices rising to the ancient rafters, Louis stopped fidgeting entirely. He stared upward, mouth slightly open, entranced by the sound. Kate smiled to herself, grateful for small mercies. These brief moments of wonder gave him the reset he needed to continue sitting through the long service. William's role in the ceremony came when he was called upon to pay homage to his father, the newly crowned king. He rose from his seat with dignity, walking forward to kneel before Charles. The moment was deeply personal yet utterly public, a son acknowledging his father as sovereign. Kate watched as William spoke the words of the oath, his voice clear and strong. She knew how complicated their relationship had been at times, how the pressures of royal life had created tensions and misunderstandings. But in this moment, there was only respect and duty. As William returned to his seat, Kate noticed that George had been watching his father intently. The boy seemed to understand, perhaps for the first time, the true nature of the future that awaited him. One day, he would kneel before his own father in a similar ceremony. One day, even further in the future, another child would kneel before him. The weight of that legacy was written across his young face, and Kate made a mental note to talk with him later, to help him process what he was feeling. Charlotte remained remarkably composed throughout, though Kate could see the effort it required. Her daughter had inherited her own careful attention to public perception, understanding even at 8 years old that cameras were capturing everything. Charlotte's posture never slumped. Her expression never wavered from polite interest. It was impressive, but also somewhat heartbreaking. Kate wanted her children to enjoy moments of pure childhood, free from the burden of constant observation. The service moved through its various stages, each segment marked by music, prayers, and ceremonial actions. The congregation stood and sat repeatedly, and Kate was grateful that the children had practiced this at home. They knew when to stand, when to bow their heads, when to remain still. Even Louis managed these transitions reasonably well, though she could see his energy building. He was doing his best, and she was proud of him for that. During one particularly lengthy prayer, Louis began to whisper to Charlotte again. This time his sister couldn't quite answer his question, and he turned to Kate instead. She leaned down and he asked in the loudest whisper a 5-year-old could manage when they could go home. A few people nearby heard and smiled sympathetically. Kate whispered back that it wouldn't be much longer, knowing full well that not much longer in adult ceremony time could feel like an eternity to a small child. The moment arrived when Queen Camilla was crowned as well, another historic occasion. Kate watched with interest, thinking about her own future. One day she would undergo a similar ceremony, would feel the weight of a crown upon her head. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. She glanced at William, wondering if he was thinking the same thing, imagining their own coronation decades in the future. As the ceremony reached its conclusion, Kate could feel the collective relief mixed with joy from those around her. It had been beautiful, moving, and historic, but it had also been exhausting. George was released from his duties and returned to sit with his family. Kate immediately pulled him close, whispering how proud she was of him. His serious expression finally cracked into a smile, and she could see the relief in his eyes that his role was complete, and he had done it well. The family stood for the final hymn, their voices joining the hundreds of others in the abbey. Charlotte sang with surprising confidence, having learned all the words in preparation. George mouthed along, still looking tired from his duties. Louis mostly looked around at everyone else singing, occasionally joining in with enthusiastic if not entirely accurate lyrics. As the newly crowned king and queen processed out of the abbey, the family prepared to follow in their designated order. Kate smoothed down Charlotte's dress one more time and checked that Louis's outfit was still properly arranged. William placed a hand on George's shoulder, a gesture of both pride and solidarity. They were a team, this family of 5, navigating the extraordinary circumstances of their lives together. The walk out of the abbey felt interminable. Louis's energy, so carefully contained during the ceremony, began to bubble over. He started to skip, and Kate gently reminded him to walk properly. He complied, but his little face showed his struggle to contain his excitement at being almost done with the formal portions of the day. Charlotte walked with perfect posture, aware that the cameras were still rolling, capturing every step. George stayed close to his father, matching his pace and his serious demeanor. Outside, the crowd's roar was deafening. Thousands upon thousands of people cheered, waved flags, and called out to the royal family. The children's eyes widened at the sight and sound of so many people. This was the reality of their lives, this constant public attention, but the scale of this particular day was unprecedented. William and Kate guided their children toward the waiting carriages, ready for the next phase of this historic day. The carriage procession from Westminster Abbey back to Buckingham Palace was a spectacle in itself. William, Kate, and their children rode in the grand carriage, the horses' hooves clip-clopping against the street as they made their way through the massive crowds. Louis pressed his face against the carriage window, waving enthusiastically at the people lining the streets. His earlier restraint had given way to pure childish excitement, and Kate decided to let him enjoy the moment. After all, he had been remarkably well behaved during the ceremony. Charlotte waved too, but with more measured movements, copying the precise royal wave she had been taught. Her hand moved in small, controlled motions, and she maintained a sweet smile throughout. George sat between his parents, looking tired but satisfied. Every so often, William would lean down and say something to him, and the boy would nod or offer a small smile. Kate knew William was probably telling George how well he had done, reinforcing that his son had successfully completed an important duty. The streets of London had been transformed for the occasion. Union Jack flags hung from every lamppost, and elaborate decorations adorned shop windows and buildings. People wore crowns made of paper and cardboard, held homemade signs, and some had even dressed in elaborate costumes. The atmosphere was festive and joyful, a celebration not just of a new king but of the continuation of tradition and history. As they passed through Trafalgar Square, the crowd seemed to grow even larger and louder. Kate pointed out various sights to the children, trying to help them absorb the magnitude of the day. She wanted them to remember this, to understand that they were part of something bigger than themselves. Charlotte asked thoughtful questions about why so many people had come, and Kate explained that people loved celebrations and history, that they wanted to be part of a special moment. Louis's attention span for waving eventually wore thin, and he turned to Charlotte with questions about when they would eat. The ceremony had been long, and it was now well past lunchtime. Charlotte shrugged, and Kate promised that there would be food once they reached the palace. William caught Kate's eye and smiled. Their youngest was so wonderfully, normally childlike in his concerns. Food and fun were his priorities, as they should be for a 5-year-old regardless of the historic nature of the day. The approach to Buckingham Palace brought even more crowds. The mall was packed with people, a sea of faces and flags stretching as far as the eye could see. The roar of the crowd intensified as the royal carriages came into view. Kate felt a surge of emotion at the sight. These people had stood for hours, some camping overnight in the rain just to be part of this moment. Their dedication to the monarchy, despite all its controversies and challenges, was deeply moving. The carriages passed through the palace gates, and the family finally had a moment of relative privacy. As they disembarked, palace staff rushed forward to assist. Louis immediately asked where the food was, causing several staff members to smile. Kate took his hand and guided him inside, with Charlotte and George following close behind. William stayed back for a moment, speaking with one of the organizers about the timing for the balcony appearance. Inside the palace, the family had a brief respite before the next public appearance. They gathered in one of the private rooms where a light lunch had been laid out. Louis attacked the sandwiches with enthusiasm while Charlotte ate more delicately. George, still in his page of honor uniform, seemed reluctant to eat anything too messy that might stain the elaborate outfit. Kate prepared a plate for him with careful selections, earning a grateful look from her eldest. William joined them, loosening his formal attire slightly now that they were away from cameras. He lifted Louis onto his lap, and the boy chattered excitedly about everything he had seen. William listened patiently, occasionally interjecting with comments or questions. Kate watched them together, her heart full. Despite the pressures and the protocol, they were still a family, still finding moments of normalcy in the midst of extraordinary circumstances. Charlotte asked Kate about the upcoming balcony appearance, wanting to know exactly what would happen and where she should stand. Kate explained the plan, describing how the whole family would gather on the palace balcony to wave to the crowds below. There would be a fly past by the Royal Air Force, weather permitting, which would be the grand finale of the day's celebrations. Charlotte nodded, taking in every detail, already planning her positioning and her waves. George sat quietly, eating his lunch and looking thoughtful. Kate moved to sit beside him, asking how he was feeling. He admitted that he was tired but happy that his duties were complete. She could see the relief in his eyes. The pressure of performing perfectly in front of millions had weighed on him, and now that it was done, he could relax slightly. She hugged him close, telling him again how incredibly proud she was, how he had represented the family beautifully. The peaceful lunch was interrupted by a gentle knock at the door. One of the palace coordinators entered to let them know it was almost time for the balcony appearance. The family had 30 minutes to prepare. Kate immediately went into organization mode, checking everyone's appearance, smoothing hair, and adjusting clothing. Louis had managed to get crumbs on his outfit, which she brushed away with a patient smile. Charlotte stood still, allowing her mother to make any necessary adjustments while George straightened his uniform one final time. William gathered the children together for a brief pep talk. He reminded them that this was the last big public moment of the day, and then they could truly relax. He asked Louis if he could manage just a little bit more good behavior, and Louis nodded enthusiastically, promising to wave nicely and not make funny faces. William and Kate both knew that promise might be hard for him to keep, but they appreciated his intentions. As they walked through the palace corridors toward the balcony, they could hear the roar of the crowd outside. The sound grew louder with each step, a constant rumble of thousands of voices. The children looked at each other with wide eyes, even Charlotte showing a moment of nervousness. Kate took Louis's hand on one side and Charlotte's on the other, while William kept George close. They reached the doorway that led to the balcony, where they would wait for their cue to step outside. King Charles and Queen Camilla were already there, along with other senior members of the royal family. Charles turned to greet his son and grandchildren, his face showing the fatigue of the long day but also unmistakable joy. He bent down to speak to each child individually, thanking George for his service as a page of honor and praising Charlotte and Louis for their good behavior. The children beamed at their grandfather's attention, any nervousness fading in the warmth of his approval. The moment arrived. The doors to the balcony opened, and the sound of the crowd exploded in volume. Charles and Camilla stepped out first, followed by William, Kate, and their children. The sight that greeted them was breathtaking. The mall stretched before them, completely filled with people. Flags waved, cameras flashed, and the cheering was so loud it was almost overwhelming. Standing on the balcony of Buckingham Palace, Kate felt the full weight of the moment wash over her. The sea of people before them seemed endless, their faces upturned, their voices joined in celebration. She positioned herself carefully, making sure the children were visible to the crowd while also keeping them close enough that she could guide them if needed. Louis stood at the front of the balcony, his small hands gripping the railing as he took in the extraordinary scene before him. William stood beside Kate, his hand occasionally resting on George's shoulder. Father and son presented a united front, the current heir and the future heir, 3 generations of the monarchy visible in one historic moment. George waved to the crowd with growing confidence, his earlier exhaustion momentarily forgotten in the excitement of the balcony appearance. He had watched his father do this countless times, and now he was old enough to understand what it meant, to feel the connection between the royal family and the people they served. Charlotte, ever the composed princess, waved with practiced precision. She had studied videos of royal balcony appearances, Kate knew, wanting to get everything just right. Her daughter's perfectionism sometimes worried her, this need to always appear flawless in public. But today, Kate could see genuine joy breaking through Charlotte's careful composure. The little girl's smile was real, her eyes bright with excitement as she watched the crowd's enthusiastic response. Then there was Louis, unpredictable and wonderfully authentic. He waved with wild enthusiasm, using both hands at times, his whole body engaged in the act of greeting the crowd. At one point, he turned to look back at his grandfather, the new king, with such obvious delight that cameras captured the moment, and it would later become one of the most shared images of the day. Louis was too young to fully understand the weight of monarchy, the burden of duty, and in that innocence, he brought a lightness to the occasion that everyone needed. The crowd's cheering intensified, and Kate could pick out individual chants and calls. Many people were shouting the children's names, calling out to George, Charlotte, and Louis. Others waved signs declaring their love for the Wales family. Kate felt overwhelmed by the outpouring of affection. Despite all the challenges the royal family had faced in recent years, the public's connection to them remained strong, particularly when it came to the children. William leaned close to Kate, saying something that was lost in the noise of the crowd, but his expression conveyed pride and contentment. They had worked so hard to give their children as normal an upbringing as possible, while preparing them for their royal roles. Seeing them here, handling this moment with such grace, validated those efforts. They were raising children who could balance duty with authenticity, who could serve the crown while remaining true to themselves. King Charles moved to the center of the balcony, acknowledging the crowd with waves and smiles. Camilla stood beside him, her own journey to this moment having been long and complicated. The family spread out around them, creating a picture of unity and continuity. Kate noticed how Charles kept glancing at his grandchildren, his face softening each time. Whatever tensions existed within the royal family, whatever complications Harry's absence created, in this moment there was only celebration. The wait for the flypast began, and Kate could feel Louis's energy building. He kept asking when the planes would come, bouncing on his toes with anticipation. William crouched down to Louis's level, pointing toward the sky and explaining what they would see. Louis listened with rapt attention, his eyes scanning the clouds for any sign of aircraft. Charlotte stood nearby, trying to maintain her composed demeanor, but clearly excited about the flypast as well. George, standing between his parents, seemed to be taking mental notes of everything. Kate watched him, observing how his grandfather interacted with the crowd, how the other adults positioned themselves, how long they waved before resting their arms. Her eldest was always watching, always learning, preparing himself for the role that would one day be his. It was both impressive and slightly heartbreaking to see such awareness in one so young. The sound came first, a distant rumble that grew steadily louder. Louis heard it immediately, his head whipping around to find the source. Charlotte grabbed Kate's hand in excitement, her careful composure cracking as genuine childish enthusiasm took over. George stood taller, his eyes fixed on the horizon. William and Kate exchanged smiles, sharing this moment of watching their children experience something truly special. Then the planes appeared, flying in perfect formation across the London sky. Red, white, and blue smoke trails followed them, creating the colors of the Union Jack against the clouds. The crowd's roar reached new heights, and on the balcony, the royal family looked up in unison. Louis pointed and shouted with delight, jumping up and down despite Kate's gentle hand on his shoulder trying to keep him calm. Charlotte's face split into a huge grin, all pretense of royal reserve forgotten. George's eyes tracked the plane's progress with intense focus, clearly fascinated by the precision of the formation. The fly-past seemed to last both forever and no time at all. Wave after wave of aircraft flew overhead, from historic planes to modern jets, a display of British military might and tradition. Kate found herself caught up in the spectacle, momentarily forgetting the cameras and the protocol, simply enjoying the moment with her family. William's arm came around her waist, pulling her close for just a second, a private gesture of affection in the midst of the very public display. As the final planes disappeared into the distance, the family continued waving to the crowd. Louis's energy was finally beginning to flag, and Kate could see him leaning against the balcony railing, still waving but with less enthusiasm. Charlotte remained picture perfect, but Kate knew her daughter well enough to see the signs of tiredness creeping in. George stood straight, determined to see the appearance through properly, but his movements had slowed. After what felt like an appropriate amount of time, King Charles began to step back from the balcony, signaling that the appearance was coming to an end. The family followed his lead, offering final waves to the crowd before turning to head back inside. As soon as they crossed the threshold into the palace, Louis practically collapsed against William, who scooped him up with a laugh. Charlotte allowed herself a big sigh, and George's shoulders finally relaxed from their rigid posture. Inside, away from the cameras and the crowds, the family could finally be themselves. Louis immediately started talking about the planes, his exhaustion momentarily forgotten in his excitement. Charlotte asked if she could take off her shoes, her feet clearly hurting from the formal footwear. George leaned against Kate, and she wrapped her arm around him, feeling him sag against her. The day had been long and demanding for all of them, but especially for the children. King Charles thanked them all for their participation, his eyes particularly on George as he praised the boy's performance as a page of honor. George stood a little straighter at his grandfather's words, pride evident despite his tiredness. Charles then suggested they all needed rest before the evening celebrations, and Kate silently thanked him for the consideration. The children needed downtime, needed to decompress from the intensity of the day's events. The family retreated to their private apartments within Buckingham Palace, finally able to escape the formality and constant observation. Kate immediately helped Louis out of his formal attire, knowing that the stiff collar and tight clothes had been bothering him for hours. He practically ran to the sofa once freed from the constraints of his outfit, sprawling across it with dramatic relief. Charlotte was more measured, carefully hanging up her dress before changing into comfortable clothes. But Kate could see the exhaustion in her daughter's movements. George needed help with his page of honor uniform, the clasps and buttons too complicated for him to manage alone. William assisted him, the two working together in comfortable silence. Once changed, George joined Louis on the sofa, and Kate marveled at how quickly they seemed to shift from formal princes to ordinary brothers, already starting to roughhouse and joke despite their tiredness. Charlotte settled into an armchair with a book, needing some quiet time to recover from the day's intensity. William loosened his formal wear and sat down heavily, the weight of the day evident in his posture. Kate brought him tea, sitting beside him and taking his hand. They sat in silence for a moment, both processing what had just happened. The coronation was over, successfully completed, and their children had performed beautifully. William's father was now officially king, which meant William was one step closer to his own inevitable reign. The thought hung unspoken between them, too heavy to address in this moment of relative peace. Kate checked her phone for the first time in hours and found it flooded with messages. Friends, family members, and colleagues all reaching out to congratulate them on the day, to praise the children's behavior, to share photos and videos from the ceremony. She scrolled through them, showing William the particularly touching ones. There were already articles being published, photos circulating on social media, and commentary from royal watchers around the world. The consensus seemed to be that the children, particularly George and Louis, had stolen the show. One video showed Louis during the ceremony, his facial expressions changing from solemn to curious to slightly bored, a perfect representation of a young child trying his best in a difficult situation. Another captured the moment George had helped with the ceremonial robes, his small face set in concentration. Charlotte appeared in dozens of photos, her composure and perfect posture earning admiration from commentators. Kate felt protective reading some of the analysis, wanting to shield her children from excessive scrutiny, while also acknowledging that this attention was simply part of their lives. Louis had fallen asleep on the sofa, his body finally giving in to the exhaustion of the long day. William carefully moved him to a more comfortable position, covering him with a blanket. The sight of his youngest child sleeping so peacefully, completely unaware of the millions of people discussing him online, filled William with complicated emotions. He wanted to protect this innocence, to give Louis more years of childhood before the full weight of royal duty settled on his shoulders. Charlotte put down her book and came to sit with Kate, leaning against her mother in a rare moment of open affection. In public, Charlotte maintained careful boundaries, aware of cameras and protocol. But here, in private, she was still a little girl who needed her mother's comfort. Kate stroked her daughter's hair, asking her about her favorite moments from the day. Charlotte talked about the music in the Abbey, the beautiful decorations, and how proud she felt seeing her grandfather crowned. She also admitted that her feet hurt, and she was hungry again, bringing a smile to Kate's face with her honesty. George remained on the sofa, scrolling through a tablet that someone had given him. He was looking at photos from the ceremony, studying them with intense focus. William noticed and joined him, and together they reviewed the images. William pointed out different aspects of the ceremony, explaining symbolism and tradition. George asked intelligent questions, clearly processing the experience and trying to understand his place in it all. Kate watched them together, seeing how William was gently mentoring their son, preparing him for the future while still allowing him to be a child. The piece was interrupted by palace staff arriving to discuss the evening's events. There would be a formal dinner, though the children would not attend. Instead, they would have their meal separately and be allowed to relax for the remainder of the evening. Kate felt relief at this news. The children had done enough for one day, had been on display long enough. They deserved to simply be children for a few hours. Dinner for the children was brought to the apartments, a selection of their favorite foods rather than formal palace fare. Louis woke up hungry and confused, taking a moment to remember where he was and what had happened. Once oriented, he attacked his dinner with enthusiasm, telling Charlotte and George all about his favorite parts of the day between bites. His perspective was charmingly different from his siblings, focused on the horses, the carriages, and the planes rather than the ceremony itself. Kate and William changed for the formal dinner, helping each other with buttons and clasps, falling into the familiar rhythm of preparing for official events. They could hear their children in the next room, their voices raised in laughter and occasional argument. It was such a normal sound, such an ordinary family moment, that it provided a grounding contrast to the extraordinary day they had experienced. Before leaving for the dinner, both parents checked on the children one more time. George was explaining something to Charlotte with serious intensity, using his hands to gesture and emphasize his points. Charlotte listened with patient attention, occasionally asking questions. Louis had chocolate on his face and was building something elaborate with the cushions from the sofa. Kate cleaned Louis's face while William reminded all three to listen to the nanny who would be staying with them. The formal dinner was everything Kate expected, elegant, lengthy, and filled with important people offering congratulations and making conversation. She and William sat near King Charles and Queen Camilla, part of the immediate royal family circle. Throughout the meal, Kate found her mind drifting back to the children, wondering if they were behaving, if Louis had gone to bed without fuss, if George was still wound up from the excitement of the day. William seemed to be having similar thoughts. Between courses, he leaned close and whispered that he couldn't wait to get back to the children, to hear their unfiltered thoughts about the day now that they had time to process it. Kate agreed, already planning the conversations they would have tomorrow, the ways they would help the children understand what they had been part of, what it meant for their futures. The dinner speeches began, and Kate focused her attention on King Charles as he addressed the gathered guests. He spoke eloquently about continuity and change, about honoring tradition while moving forward into a new era. He thanked his family for their support, his eyes finding William across the room. Kate saw the emotion in both men's faces, the complicated relationship between father and son, evident even in this moment of celebration. When Charles mentioned his grandchildren, praising their behavior and their grace during the ceremony, Kate felt tears prick her eyes. Her children had handled more pressure today than most people face in a lifetime, and they had done it with remarkable composure. She thought about George's serious face as he performed his duties, Charlotte's perfect posture throughout the long ceremony, and Louis's genuine joy on the balcony. Each child had contributed something unique and valuable to the day. The evening finally drew to a close, and William and Kate made their way back to their apartments. They found all three children asleep, George and Charlotte in their beds and Louis curled up on the sofa where he had apparently fallen asleep watching a movie. The nanny reported that they had been relatively well behaved, though Louis had resisted bedtime initially, still excited from the day's events. William carefully lifted Louis and carried him to his bedroom, the boy barely stirring as his father tucked him into bed. Kate watched from the doorway, her heart full at the sight of William being so gentle with their youngest. Despite all the formality and protocol they had to maintain in public, these private moments of tenderness were what truly defined their family. She moved to check on Charlotte and George, finding both sleeping soundly, their faces peaceful and relaxed after the demanding day. Kate and William finally had a moment alone together, collapsing onto the sofa in their sitting room. The silence felt precious after hours of crowds, music, and constant conversation. William pulled Kate close, and they sat in comfortable quiet, both processing the enormity of what had just happened. The coronation was over, but its implications would ripple through their lives for years to come. Charles was now king, William was officially the heir with all the responsibilities that entailed, and their children had taken their first real steps into public royal life. Kate broke the silence first, voicing what they were both thinking. The children had been magnificent, better than either parent had dared hope. George had shown maturity beyond his years, handling the pressure of his role with grace. Charlotte had been composed and lovely throughout, winning hearts with her perfect behavior. And Louis, unpredictable Louis, had brought exactly the right amount of authentic joy to balance the formality of the occasion. People would remember his genuine reactions, his uninhibited waves, his childish enthusiasm. William agreed, though his voice carried notes of concern alongside the pride. He worried about what this day meant for George especially. Their eldest son was no longer just a child in the public's eyes. He was the future king's heir, a young boy with an ancient destiny. Today had made that reality unavoidable, undeniable. George had performed duties that connected him directly to the crown, and there would be no going back to the relative anonymity of early childhood. William remembered his own experience growing up in the spotlight, the pressure and the pain of it, and he wanted better for his son. Kate understood these fears because she shared them. But she also saw strength in their children, resilience that came from being raised with love and support. They were doing their best to give George, Charlotte, and Louis tools to handle their unique circumstances. The children knew they were loved unconditionally, not for their titles or their duties, but for who they were as individuals. That foundation, Kate believed, would help them navigate the challenges ahead. The conversation turned to the public reaction, the overwhelming response on social media and in the news. William had been briefed on the general sentiment, which was overwhelmingly positive. People had fallen in love with the children, particularly the contrast between George's serious dedication to duty and Louis's playful authenticity. Charlotte's grace had also captured attention, with many commenting on how poised she seemed for her age. The Wales family was being praised as a symbol of the monarchy's future, young and relatable yet respectful of tradition. Kate felt the weight of those expectations. Being seen as the monarchy's great hope meant living under constant scrutiny, having every parenting decision analyzed and criticized. She thought about the delicate balance they tried to maintain, giving their children normal experiences like school and playdates, while also preparing them for royal responsibilities. Days like today made that balance even more difficult to achieve. How could George go back to being just another student at school after serving as a page of honor at his grandfather's coronation? William stood and poured them both a drink, a small toast to surviving the day. They clinked glasses quietly, mindful of the sleeping children nearby. He admitted that he felt conflicted about his own emotions regarding the coronation. He was genuinely happy for his father, proud to see Charles finally receive the crown he had waited so long to wear. But William also couldn't help thinking about his own future coronation. The day when he would take that same oath, wear that same crown. It felt both impossibly far away and frighteningly close. Kate asked him about the moment when he had paid homage to his father, kneeling before the new king. William's expression became thoughtful, almost distant. He described feeling the full weight of history in that instant, the centuries of tradition pressing down on him. But he had also felt a deep personal connection to his father, a moment of understanding between them that transcended their complicated relationship. In that gesture of homage, William had acknowledged not just his king but his father, the man who had raised him and prepared him for this path. They talked about the coming days and weeks, the way life would shift now that Charles was king. There would be new responsibilities for William and Kate, new expectations and demands on their time. The children's schedules would likely change as well, with more official engagements and public appearances expected. Kate worried about maintaining the relatively normal childhood they had worked so hard to provide. William reassured her that they would continue to prioritize the children's well-being, even as their public roles expanded. The conversation eventually wound down, both of them too exhausted to process much more. They made one final check on the children before retiring to their own room. George had kicked off his covers and Kate tucked him back in, pressing a gentle kiss to his forehead. Charlotte slept curled on her side, clutching a stuffed animal she rarely admitted to still needing. Louis was sprawled across his bed in typical 5-year-old fashion, taking up far more space than his small body should require. Lying in bed, Kate reflected on the day from beginning to end. She thought about the moment she had watched George process down the aisle in his ceremonial uniform, her heart in her throat. She remembered Charlotte's focused expression during the ceremony, the little girl's determination to be perfect. She recalled Louis's face lighting up during the flypast, pure joy unburdened by understanding of protocol or duty. Each child had given her different reasons to feel proud, different moments that would stay with her forever. William's breathing had already deepened into sleep, the exhaustion of the day finally catching up with him. Kate envied his ability to fall asleep so quickly, but her mind continued racing. She thought about the future, about the coronations yet to come. One day William would be crowned and she would become queen consort. Their children would play different roles, George as heir, Charlotte and Louis as supporting members of the royal family. The trajectory of their lives had been set long before they were born, but days like today made it feel immediate and real. She wondered what kind of world her children would inherit, what the monarchy would look like when George eventually became king. Would the institution survive and thrive, adapting to changing times while maintaining its essential character? Or would the pressures of modern life, the demands for transparency and relevance fundamentally transform what it meant to be royal? Kate knew these were questions without easy answers, challenges that would unfold over decades. But for now, in this quiet moment, her children were safe and sleeping. They had survived their first major test in the public eye and had exceeded all expectations. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new scrutiny, and new responsibilities. But tonight they were simply a family who had shared an extraordinary day together. Kate finally felt her eyes growing heavy, her thoughts beginning to drift. She turned on her side, moving closer to William's warmth, and let sleep claim her. The next morning would bring newspaper front pages plastered with photos of the children, analysis of every moment, and endless commentary on what the coronation meant for the monarchy's future. But it would also bring the simple joy of George, Charlotte, and Louis, waking up and recounting their favorite memories, arguing over breakfast, and slowly returning to their normal routines. The coronation had been historic and magnificent, but it was these ordinary family moments that Kate treasured most. The reminder that beneath the crowns and titles, they were parents raising children who happened to have extraordinary destinies. As she drifted off to sleep, Kate held on to that thought, letting it comfort her as she faced the unknown future that lay ahead for her remarkable family.